Hi students, welcome to Turito live classes. Today we are going to learn about a new topic for the discussion, that is, do plants breathe? That is the topic for today. So, let us here see. So, we are going to understand this particular topic. So, this may seems to be a quite simple topic, but we would like to look into the details if there is any. So, starting here we will have an understanding. So, before going to the details we would like to look at the topics what we have planned for you today. I mean the learning objectives, we will be looking into it today. So, here we are. So, we need to understand breathing. So, we basically see breathing as an important process, that is fine. So, here if you understand, we will understand breathing as a precursor for the process of respiration. So, that is respiration is a bit more than breathing. Okay. So, now we will be looking into the breathing, which is actually the required process for the respiration to occur. Now, we have this, we need to understand this process of interrelationship between producers and consumers, that is how they are linked in the aspect of this breathing. And then we will be looking into specialized structures in plants helping for exchange of respiratory gases. Of course, when they are breathing, so we need to understand that is respiration happening here, right. So, that respiration process we will be looking into now. Next, we will be understanding the structures called the metaphors in mangroves for exchange of respiratory gases. So, how they are performing these exchange of the gases, especially in the roots of these mangrove trees. So, let us see here, the first question comes into the head, that is the topic itself, that is, do plants breathe? That is the question. Now, do you think so? Do plants breathe? So, it is a very simple question. I see many of you trying to drop something here. Yes, yes, we are already in grade 10th, and we certainly understand that when we are having this kind of discussion, it's been, it is quite simple and obvious to understand that all these years whatever we have learnt. So, that shows us that here if you see that we have understood by now based on the previous classes whatever we have heard. Yes, they do respire, they do breathe, correct. So, let us understand about ourselves. So, in the previous class we had an understanding about ourselves. Okay. So, here we need to note down few things what we do, in the sense animals do. So, it is quite simple and obvious based on our experiences that animals do breathe. Okay. Okay. So, don't worry, don't mind that I am discussing about animals, because there is a link we are trying to establish that. So, animals breathe. Okay. So, you see here when animals are breathing, so there are certain things we have to understand, So, they have lungs, only lungs to do that function, and you see them they will be having alveoli within the lungs. There are over 600 million alveoli present inside the lungs, and they do the function of exchanging respiratory gases. Okay, fine. So, certainly we get to see only lungs and alveoli performing that function. No other place in our body we find where exchange of respiratory gases could occur. I do not think so. We do have like that. Do we? Do we have such that other than the lungs of the animals, or in our case other than the lungs, do we have any other structure that is actually helping in exchange of the respiratory gases within ourselves? Guess over it. Okay. So, I see people are dropping here in the chat boxes. So, certainly not, I do not think so. We use our nostrils, and the air, the gas goes inside our body, that is oxygen. Okay. And when it goes into the body, we saw the roots, it is the nostrils, and then the pharynx, then you see the trachea is followed by the bronchi is followed by the bronchioles, and then you see reaches to the alveoli. Okay. That is what we have learned in the previous session. So, there is a link here, we have to establish that. So, this is a quite long sequence what we have, okay, and that is a flow chart. So, you understand that. So, there is a distance between the nostrils, if I have to mention here, you see the that's a long go. It's really a long go. Nostrils to lungs is really a long distance. Fine. So we have nostrils. So if I say nostrils, so they are related to nose. Usually animals have nose. Higher order animals have nose. Yes, fine. They are not the lower order animals. Okay. If not nose, at least the nostrils would be present. They are prominent. They are prominent. And certainly you will find the same thing even in birds. If you think in case of amphibians, or if you think of reptiles, or even if you think of let us say mammals, like a big blue whale, how does it look like? They have some openings at the dorsal surface of the body. You see that they have a very big opening and water gushes outside, isn't it? You might have seen. So what do we call them, by the way, those openings? Do we call them nostrils, or some other word is used? Drop in there, Parwan. Come on, children. There are holes on the surface of the whales. Okay, you might have at least watched on television that they will be like blowing out their water. Sometimes you see, or sometimes the air comes out. So what is that holes doing there, and what is their what are they called as? What are they called as? Yes, yes, I got an answer. It's good. It's correct. Correct. That means you see, like we do have nose, and our nose have two openings, and we call that openings as nostrils. Okay, but in their case, it's not known as nostrils. So in the case of whales, so that is known as blowholes, right? In the lower classes, children read this, blowholes. Okay, so that's a difference there. So what I'm trying to show you is, you think of a blue whale, you think of a deer, lion, cat, monkey, whichever organism you think of, especially the animal kingdom. Okay, higher order animals, you will not find other than the nostrils or lungs doing the function of respiration. Okay, with few exceptions. Can you spot those exceptions? What am I guessing for? Our exchange of gases is done by other than the nose. Can you guess? I gave a clue when I was discussing about, when I was naming about few animal kingdom members, few groups of the animal kingdom. I said reptiles, aves, or we have amphibians, annelids. So this is a clue. Give a guess. It's quite simple, children, not so bit difficult. Okay, see, there are exceptions, I said, and I am writing the exceptions here on the board with another color. Have a look at it. So exception starts with earthworms. Now you might say that, sir, earthworms are, they are not of the higher grade animals. I agree with that. Fine. But what about frog? So compared to earthworms, that is annelids, frog is having more complex arrangement within itself. So that's belong to amphibian, that is also complex. So that does belong to the higher order animal. Now the case is here, what you have to understand is, so they have blowholes, we have nostrils, and several other animals have nostrils. Other than that, they don't use anything else to breathe, that is exchange of gases. Here if you see, in the case of earthworms, certainly they don't have nostrils. So here we have to understand something here, no nostrils for them. Okay, now the question stands here something different. When earthworms are having no nostrils, then how do they breathe? Give an answer for that. Okay, great. So when you see earthworms are having no nostrils, it's quite simple and obvious that you might have learnt in the lower classes, they use their skin to do it, right? They use their skin in order to breathe. That's quite simple, right? When they use your skin, so we have a specific name for that, isn't it? Do you remember that kind of respiration done by skin? Come on, post in the group. Come on, children, you can do it. Okay, let me put it here again. So, if some organisms like sort of worms, earthworms, if they do the process of respiration using skin, we call that respiration as cutaneous respiration. You remember that, the word cutaneous respiration? Grade 9th you already crossed, so I hope you might be knowing that word. So, that is cutaneous respiration. Now, when it comes to the other one, what I have just mentioned, if you observe carefully, that is frog. Now, if you think of a frog, let us say, does it have nostrils? The first question. Okay, that is quite simple. So, when it comes to frog, yes, we should go green here because it has nostrils. Okay, there is the availability of nostrils. Now, one question again comes up here. This guy is having nostril, we are also having nostrils. Now, the question for both of us stands same, that is, what if we both go into the water? Can we use our nostrils for breathing? Can you, when you jump into a pool for swimming, do you use nostrils for breathing? Yes, so certainly not. You will not use nostrils for breathing. So, same stands for this guy also, amphibians. They do not use nostrils for breathing when they are in pools. So, what do? How do they do it? So, again the same thing, they use skin for the respiration process, exchange of gases when they are inside the water mostly, and even when they are outside the water, they have glands on their surface of the skin, and that would help them to keep the skin wet, and that uses it to take the oxygen. So, that is how the skin is taking care of the function. So, if the skin is wet, it makes sure in these two organisms the oxygen gets diffused into the body. So, when it is diffused into the body through the membrane, we call that as osmosis right now usually. So, that is the situation. So, both of them can perform cutaneous respiration. Now, why I am trying to understand about all these animals and over here for breathing and respiration, there is a thing we have to understand. So, in animals, most of the higher animals, you see them, they have only two openings, that is nostrils for breathing. Okay. When it comes to few exceptions, just I have mentioned two here, one is earthworm, another is frog. So, there is an exception. So, in the case of earthworm, you see that they can only breathe in or breathe out using their skin, which is cutaneous respiration. Okay. When it comes to frog, you see that it has nostrils, but additionally they have skin which is wet most of the time because of the glands, and when it goes into the water obviously. So, you see that those structures on the body and the skin, when if it is wet, it also performs the same thing, that is cutaneous respiration. But we do not do that, we as humans, we do not do that thing, we cannot have that system. I do not think so we have. Do we have? What if someone closes your nose and mouth, and do you think can you exchange your respiratory gases? Is it possible? It is not possible. That could end up us dying out of suffocation. Yes. So, that is what happens. Now, looking at these things, we will understand most of the higher order animals have only one type of organ. Great, correct. So, some of you are dropping in the responses, correct. So, one type of organs or the structures help in respiratory exchange of the respiratory gases, that is correct. So, when it comes to here, if you observe, some of the exceptions are also there in animals, correct. But when it comes to plants, children, I need to focus here. So, they do breathe, right. So, they do breathe, and their breathing also requires the same gas what we need for breathe, that is oxygen, and just like you and me, they give out carbon dioxide also. That is quite common, right. But there is something difference here, an exception here. When you compare these organisms with herbivores, I mean the consumers I am speaking about. If that is the case, you will understand something, that because they are at the higher end, because why they are at the higher end I will tell you, this is the reason, because they are producers, okay. They run the show completely throughout the ecosystem, that is the beginning by them, right. So, when they are producers, they take in oxygen, carbon dioxide, that is what we know. Another part which makes them to become producer is because they have carbon dioxide to take in, okay. So, they take in the carbon dioxide, at the same time you see them, they will give out the oxygen also, that is the usual thing, right. Now, this is something interesting here to understand, they also need oxygen, they also need carbon dioxide. So, they need to make something for themselves to consume, then they need carbon dioxide, and if they need to generate energy with what they have made something earlier, then they need oxygen. Now, that is what we need to understand. So, this makes us understand that they do breathe, right. You got it, got the point. Now, the question comes very clearly here, how do they do it? How do they breathe? So, do plants breathe? Yes, they do it, but the next question comes up here is, how do they do it? That is a simple question. So, can anyone tell me how do they do it? Any structures helping them to do so? Yeah, so it is quite simple, right. So, I see most of you are dropping it as stomata, okay, that is correct, and I do not think so, that is wrong here. Okay, so one such opening is stomata. Okay, what else do they have to do that? Okay, I hardly get any other response other than stomata. Okay, another question, where do you see the stomata available? Do we see them on flowers, or do we see them on stems, or do we see them on leaves? So, obviously, we will find them on leaves, and if you can see, we may find some on the sepals of the flower. There is a possibility, right? We may find like that too, right? So, this is a scenario where you are aware of these topics. So, this is to make you understand what we know already. So, we are trying to compare the animal procedure, how do they do the breathing process, how about plants, do they do it. So, initially we started with, do they do it? Then we come to a conclusion, yes, they do it. Then the question comes, how do they do it? Then we saw some of the answers here like this. So, that is correct. So, let us move forward. What else you have any question regarding that? So, but I want to show you something here. Yes. Now, that's interesting topic. See, so this is what is respiration. You see. Okay. So, that is what usually happens. We just discussed. Now, hopefully, if this is a scenario 1, so I think surely we can flip this situation, right, based on our current understanding. So, I would use this. So, what is happening here is oxygen, you know, we take, that is what I said, okay, and this is given to plants, not only plants, in other words, it is given to those organisms which has the ability to make something on their own, photosynthesis. Now, based on our current discussion, if we try to flip that thing, we will understand this. So, everything changes now, you see, you know, they also need, yeah, here I will write it. So, that is the oxygen needed by them, right. So, who needs the oxygen, and when the situation changes, both the animals and plants need. So, either way what you can make out is, it is respiration needed for both. Now, what is the need of respiration for both? Can anyone tell me based on the previous discussion? Have a look at it, try to think, and just let me know why do we need respiration. Okay, great. Great, great. So, it is the same thing what we have dealt and the same thing you are dropping in here in the chat box. Why anyone needs respiration process? So, you understood that this main process is needed in order to have its energy generation process, right. So, there is a need for even plants to generate energy, because all the day if they are making their own food, that is good, they are self sufficient, but what is the use of that food if they are unable to generate energy, isn't it? If they are unable to generate energy, what is the use of that food? So, if they have to generate energy, they need oxygen whatever they are releasing while making the food. So, that is the reason why you see that during the night time, okay, they do not undergo the process of photosynthesis, right. But here what is happening in the night time, because of the limiting factor, that is light, that does not allow them to have the process of photosynthesis. But here what happens, during the night you see them, they do not, they release a whole lot of carbon dioxide. So, when they release a whole lot of carbon dioxide, it means they are taking in a lot of oxygen. It is that point of time when respiration is at its peak. So, this respiration process at night is at peak, because there is a limiting factor of light. So, it cannot perform photosynthesis. So, they perform respiration, because which is the energy generation process. It is at that point of time they take in oxygen and generate energy. One question again, one more question, just let me answer that question, children. The question is very simple. If during night time they are doing the respiration, what about daytime? Do they do respiration during daytime? That is the question. Drop in the responses in the chat box. So, the question is, do plants respire during day? Do they do it during daytime? Come on, think over it. Do plants respire during daytime? That is a question. Okay, I am getting most of the answers as no. Most of you are voting for photosynthesis. That is what they do during daytime. Okay, that is what you say. Okay, of course, they do the process of photosynthesis during daytime, no doubt about it. But what I wanted to mention is they perform the process of respiration also. That means during the daytime they do perform the process of respiration. But the thing here is, when the plants are performing respiration, the rate of respiration during daytime is less than the rate of photosynthesis. Got it? So, whether it is day or night, children, just remember that, whether it is an animal or plant, if it is day or night, either of them need energy, because whether it is day or night, all our routine works are not stopped. If one has to maintain their own bodily functions, energy is required, whether it is a plant or an animal, energy is required. So, that is the reason why we have to understand that even during the daytime they perform the process of respiration. That is, plants do perform the process of respiration during daytime, okay, but the rate of photosynthesis is outraging the rate of respiration in plants during daytime. Got it? So, hope you understood that. So, any questions by now? Come on, drop in. Any questions? Anything you want to ask? Okay, please drop in the chat box. Okay, we will try to address that. Okay, let us move forward then. So, here respiration in plant, that is what we just discussed. So, plants require oxygen for respiration to occur, and they also give out carbon dioxide, as just we discussed, right. The same thing we discussed. And then you see plants, unlike animals, have no specialized organs for gaseous exchange. That means what you said about stomata. So, stomata is not an organ. If you think carefully, as a whole, leaf or leaves, these are our organs respectively. right. So, leaves are organs, not the stomata. Now, have you come across this particular word? Lenticels, have you? So, you see that they have stomata, okay, they have lenticels now, okay, that is what we understand. So, this is what a stomata would look like. I know some of you might feel so bored by looking at it, but this is what you have to learn for today's session to understand. So, this is our stomata. Let us have a look at it clearly. We can understand the upper layer, that is epidermal layer, epidermal cell, okay, and you see a stomatal pore opening here. This whole structure is known as the pore, through which gaseous exchange takes place, whether it is respiratory exchange, respiratory gaseous exchange, or photosynthetic gaseous exchange would takes place from here. Now, I have a question. So, this pore is available, so it gives out either or takes in CO2 or oxygen. Does it allow the passage of any other gas? Think over it by looking at the structure. Does it allow to pass through it any other gas? Does it allow any gas to pass through it? It's a simple question, right? So, and you have answered it very simply. It's quite simple. Yes, it does allow the passage of a gas which was liquid in the normal state. That is, it allows the passage of the water in the form of gas. In other words, we call that state of water as vapor. So, water vapor is also given out of it. It is obvious and simple. That is transpiration we are thinking about right now. So, that is the process what is seen there. Now, what about lenticels? Have you seen lenticels anytime, children? Okay, most of you are saying no, 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 no. Okay. So, most of you are saying no, but I am sure that you have seen it probably, at least some of you might have seen it, but the thing is you may not know that as lenticels, which I would like to show you now. If you look at here, you know there are so many plants and trees around ourselves. If you observe, for some plants you will find this kind of arrangement. I would like to highlight that with a specific color. So, this is a plant. If you observe carefully, you are finding some small dots or white spots. I am encircling them. Can you see that? Those white spots on the stem or the trunk of this plant. Now, it is these spots what you are looking at, okay. They are known as lenticels. For this plant it is like this, but for this plant you see they are quite bigger in size, the lenticels what you are looking at, right. Now, you tell me, have you seen these kinds of plants? You know, when I say plants, herbs, shrubs and trees come into the category, okay. So, if you observe carefully, so these plants, you know, this is a tree, big tree, and look at the structure of the bark, you know, it is having some, as if it is a, you know, it looks like as if it is a rock and someone has carved out of this thing, isn't it, some small bits. It is not like that, it is a trunk of a tree, okay, and if you observe, it is having these kind of structures on its surface, and these kind of structures are known as lenticels, okay, and they have got a good work to do. So, they are also involved in exchange of gases. What kind of gases they do exchange here? Yes, some say oxygen, carbon dioxide, some say carbon dioxide, oxygen, that is correct. In short, in simple way, we call it as exchange of respiratory gases. So, they are involved in exchange of the respiratory gases. For some of you it may not be visible, I will use this. Right, respiratory gases. Now, the question comes here, you might be wondering, some of you are already posting in the group, sir, when they have stomata, why we need this? Now, can anyone answer that question? When we have this, Okay, why we need this in plants? Think about ourselves, think about plants, compare the sizes, and you would also understand the various complex things in plants, and that is the reason why it is here available. So, it is the lenticels are present in the trees, you see them. Of course, you might have seen by now, by looking at it you must be realizing now that these white spots are openings on the stem of the plant or the bark of the plant or the trunk of the plant, what you see are actually lenticels. Now, children, you have to understand one thing. Okay, I got few responses saying that because the size of the tree is very big, so leaves alone cannot supply the enough oxygen required for respiration. So, that is why they have. So, that is absolute correct answer. Okay. So, you see here when these trees are available around ourselves and you see them having these kind of structures, plant is a very complex structure compared to animal cells. If you understand, compared to us, plant is also a complex structure. Okay. Now, what happens here is leaves alone, they cannot suffice the need of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay. So, leaving carbon dioxide aside, it is the need of the oxygen is more, because you might understand energy requirement is both day and night, but food is found only in the daytime, right. Now, what happens here is because plant has to maintain the contact of the air, it maintains it with almost all the parts of its body, even the roots does that, even the stems like this does that. Okay. Leaves obviously they will be doing it, right? They do it usually, not like us. We have only one particular organ or the structure that help us to exchange the respiratory gases, but plants, they have to do it all their own, and most of the parts of the body are used for that purpose of exchange of respiratory gases. When it comes to this, have you ever been through that? What is that, pneumatophore? So, of course, the image is quite self-explanatory, and before I say that, many of you are having an understanding of this, that is the pneumatophore and belongs to a tree called mangrove. We usually find the trees in which region? Where do we find them? Of course, we do find them in the beaches. Okay, that is quite simple and obvious. Okay. Now, let us see that. I try to find them in beaches, close to the water sources. You see that. What is the reason that these roots come out and these guys are usually found near the beaches, right? Okay. Or sometimes the famous mangrove thing, that is Sundarbans. We have them in West Bengal, the largest delta on the planet. That is what is circling, right? It is the largest mangrove forest on the earth. So, you see the Sundarbans also, we see only this kind of arrangement. The mangrove tree will be there, and you will find the roots would be coming up like this. So, these all are pneumatophores. These roots are known as pneumatophore roots. So, we need to understand something here, children. This whole area, because that is very close to the sea, okay, this land which is there, it is quite drenched or wet mostly. You see that it is having lot of water, sea water. Now, you might have heard, when plants get excess of water, they die, isn't it? They die. Okay. But here the case is bit different, because they can able to survive even though that is a salt water. When we say sea or beach, that is a salt water obviously, right. They are able to survive here. But the terrestrial plants, for example, these days we get to have floods in part of the country because of the monsoons, some part of the country were affected with that. Okay. So, when you see the crops grown by the farmers and that whole field was filled with water, the crop dies out and it can't handle such a amount of water. But here the case is different, even though it is very close to the beach and you have a lot of water here, you have to understand that these roots come up. So, why do they come up? Because they come up for this particular reason. Using these small openings, they are known as pneumatophores. All of these openings, okay, they are known as pneumatophores. Okay. So, these pneumatophores are more important for us. Okay. So, when you see that they cannot exchange the respiratory gases inside the water, as you are aware of it, because we can't do it. Even some of the bigger organisms like whales, they can't do that. Fine. Now, here you see that they come out of the soil, they try to come out of the water also, because there is a water available if in the case, and that is how they exchange the respiratory gases. So, even roots need oxygen. So, even the terrestrial plants, they do the process of exchanging the respiratory gases, that is breathing, but they can do it inside the soil itself. But here these plants, the mangroves, do it outside the soils. There is a need for them to do it. Now, that gases exchange is more important, and plants take care of it like this, how I told. So, plants do not exhibit great demand of gaseous exchange. They need gaseous exchange, but the need is not so as high as like we do. So, we have different organs for them to do the process, that is roots, stems, leaves, they all take part in doing that. So, they respire at rates far lower than animals do, because the structure is very big. The animal structure is really very, very big. So, all alone the leaves with microscopic stomata cannot suffice the need of respiratory gaseous exchange. So, plants have an additional modification within themselves, so that they can respire, right. So, during photosynthesis, large volume of gases are exchanged. Each leaf is well adapted to take care of its own needs during these periods, that is during photosynthesis. Okay. So, like I mentioned, during photosynthesis what happens is, that is in the daytime, rate of respiration in the daytime is less in plants compared to rate of photosynthesis. That is something interesting you have to understand. Next, you see energy generation. So, why they are doing all these things? We did discuss that in the upcoming session, is not it? Sorry, in the previous discussion, and just at the beginning of this session we understood that why do they do it? It is for energy generation. So, most of the plant cells have at least a good part of their surface in contact with air. So, they must have in contact with air, and this also facilitated by loose packing of parenchyma cells in leaves. So, hope you understand this parenchyma. It was dealt in the previous class, that is grade 9th, right. So, parenchyma mainly fills up the gaps, but in the case of leaves, at some spaces they are packed in loosely. So, apart from stems and roots, which also are interconnected with the air spaces, they also allow the exchange of the respiratory gases. You see this, the complete combustion of glucose. So, they generated food in the daytime, and they will combine the generated food with the oxygen, okay, and that is what they are calling it as combustion, that results in, okay. So, they have to combine that, and that results in formation of glucose, and glucose is used there. So, the food is ultimately turning itself into glucose, and that glucose will be combined together with oxygen, and you see that is a reaction occurring here. So, that glucose and oxygen combines, that gives us carbon dioxide and energy. And of course, if you might have observed, we did an activity where we were trying to sense the water vapor coming out of our nose, right. So, here also we would see that water vapor coming out of it. So, it is the same reaction what we see in the higher animals, almost all the plants. We all need energy, whether it is day or night, we need energy. Okay. So, in animals you see they cannot synthesize their own food, and their activities are quite more than the plants. So, animals does a lot of exchange of respiratory gases. Their rate of exchange of respiratory gases is very, very high compared to plants. So, this process of energy generation there are sufficient reasons to believe that first cells on this planet lived in an atmosphere that lacked oxygen. So, billions of years ago, when life just began, then there was not much oxygen available. It was not having at all. Okay? So, they were, because there was no oxygen available, so they are like, they have to be anaerobes. That is why it is mentioned here as facultative anaerobes. Sorry, they have to be obligatory anaerobes. Okay. So, when they lacked oxygen, that means the first cells are obligatory anaerobes. Obligatory anaerobes means they do not need oxygen. At no point of time they will be needing oxygen. Okay? But here there are other organisms where they are known as facultative anaerobes, which means if oxygen is available, they will use oxygen to generate energy, and if oxygen is not available, they use another mode of generation of energy. So, usually all living organisms, they have special enzymatic machinery to oxidize glucose without the use of oxygen. So, that is what is being facultative anaerobes. That means, if the oxygen is available, they use it to generate energy. If the oxygen is not available, they will not use it for generation energy. That means, without using oxygen, they will generate energy. Now, here you see the process in which glucose is broken down to generate energy without using oxygen is glycolysis. So, here what happens, glucose is converted into an acid called pyruvic acid, and that happens in the cytoplasm of the cells, and that results in the generation of energy later process. So, this is something interesting we will be learning in the upcoming session. So, hope you understood this session here. So, I would like to review what we have done so far, starting with, we are trying to understand the breathing in plants as a precursor for respiration in plants. So, first breathing is a required process, and once done, that is when we see the process of respiration. And we understood that, explored the interrelationship between producers and consumers. That is the structure with the lung and the plant, and how they are interchanging their needs. I mean, how they are sufficing their needs by the interchange of the respiratory gases, right. And we saw that we analyzed the specialized structures in plants helping to exchange the respiratory gases, followed by pneumatophores. How do they do it for exchange of the respiratory gases? How they help the mangroves to exchange the gases? And finally, we end up with the discussion of the glycolysis, where without usage of oxygen, energy is generated. So, that was a quite simple process which we will be dealing in the upcoming session. So, hope you understood this particular discussion what we had. So, thank you. We will learn again in the upcoming session.